I spent the last episode of this series gushing over how well I think Dark Souls handles its tutorial, the Undead Asylum, but the rest of the game is very different. It doesn't teach you any more about the controls aside from the purely cosmetic gesture command, and very little else is overtly explained to you outside of optional conversations with other characters. It gets really interesting in the game's later areas, which frequently introduce entirely new mechanics that might not show up anywhere else. So the question becomes, how do you teach a one-off mechanic clearly and quickly without using tutorials? To me, the answer lies in the Catacombs. The Catacombs are close to the Firelink Shrine, which is the first area you visit after the tutorial, but to get there you need to go through the nearby graveyard. The skeletons here have more health and deal more damage than many of the other enemies you can face at this point, so they'll likely dissuade you from exploring the area until later when you actually have to go to the Catacombs. When you come back better prepared, you'll probably make short work of the skeletons as you work your way down. It's subtle, but this is actually the first lesson the game provides to prepare you for the Catacombs, establishing a baseline for what you expect from the skeletons. Specifically, it teaches you that they can die. It might seem like a silly thing, because, all enemies die, right? But it makes more sense once you reach the Catacombs themselves. Importantly, this is the only way to enter the Catacombs, making it as likely as possible that you get this baseline before you enter. When you enter the Catacombs, you're attacked by another skeleton, and at first it seems just like those in the graveyard before it. Looks can be deceiving though. When you kill it, unless you meet a particular condition to which I'll return in a bit, you won't get any souls and it won't stay dead, quickly getting back up to attack you again. You don't actually need to kill the skeleton yourself to see this happen either. As you saw here, these hovering exploding heads called wisps might do it for you. What From Software has done here is really cool. They set you up with an expectation of how skeletons work. They can die. Then, that expectation is immediately undermined when you encounter the reanimating skeletons in the Catacombs. In so doing, they give you the clues to figure out entirely through observation that an outside force is acting upon these skeletons. This isn't the only way they subvert your expectations here either, as this mechanic upends all of the combat strategies you're likely to have developed up until this point in the game. Combat in Dark Souls revolves around enemies who will attack at any opportunity, and a lock-on system that can let non-locked enemies easily reach your blind spots to tear you apart. This incentivizes slow, careful play with the goal of fighting only one enemy at a time. However, the perpetually reviving skeletons in the Catacombs force you to rethink this strategy since they'll just get back up to gang up on you. Like me, you might find that the best option is to simply run past them in the hopes of finding what's causing them to reanimate. By forcing you to rethink your established strategies, the Catacombs keep you on your toes, keeping you focused, immersed, and engaged. This is where the area's environmental design comes into play. The first part of the Catacombs has one primary path that funnels you down to a room where you'll find a new enemy, the Necromancer. With his bright lantern, he's impossible to miss in the dark room, which is a great use of signposting to grab your attention, and since you're at a dead end once you've killed him, you have no choice but to turn and face the train of skeletons that's probably following you. It's at this point you'll find that the skeletons chasing you can die without getting back up, teaching you, again entirely through observation, that the Necromancer was the one resurrecting them. The way this area is laid out, along with the way resurrection changes the combat, ensures that all of this occurs in quick succession to make it as likely as possible that you associate the Necromancer's death with the skeletons no longer reanimating. You even get a sweet reward for figuring this out in the form of the area's first bonfire. This is one of my favorite introductions to a mechanic that I've seen in a game because it effectively uses the game's established mechanics to teach you something new. Let's do a big picture recap. It starts off by giving you a basic introduction to skeletons in the graveyard, establishing a baseline for what you expect from them. Then once you reach the Catacombs, it completely subverts this expectation and the game's entire combat strategy to hint that something else is affecting the skeletons. Finally, the environment itself is designed to lead you to the Necromancer, showing you what's controlling the skeletons. It does all this in a span of maybe 5 minutes if you die a few times, like I did, and teaches you the entire mechanic without explicitly telling you anything, leaving you the satisfaction of figuring it out. You solve the puzzle entirely on your own, making your eventual aha moment all the more satisfying. I mentioned before that there is one way around the resurrection mechanic, and I wouldn't be providing you complete information if I didn't expand on that a bit. There are certain weapons in the game that deal a particular type of damage that prevents skeletons from reviving even if their Necromancer is still alive. I won't spoil what it is, since I feel like the thrill of discovery is a big part of what makes the Dark Souls experience, but it will make sense once you find out what it is. On your first playthrough, there are only 4 ways you could get such a weapon. You could find the only weapon of this type that's available through exploration just lying around the game world, but it's located in a completely optional area. You could upgrade your weapons to be of this type, but you'd need loot from a completely optional boss. You could create a special weapon of this type using the loot from a different boss, but it's one you don't need to fight before you go to the Catacombs. And finally, you could farm a single type of enemy for a rare weapon drop, but this, of course, is also optional. Add to this the fact that only a small handful of characters even mention that this kind of damage is useful here, all through optional dialogues, mind you, and it seems to me that From Software didn't expect you to have one of these weapons on your first time in the Catacombs. Instead, it seems to me that they included this feature as a reward for exploring and investigating Lordran thoroughly. But enough about that, back to the Catacombs. I think it's really interesting that the next two Necromancers, which are both in the next area, are very easy to spot. The first can throw fireballs at you from across a chasm before you're in melee range, which forces you to dodge both his skeletons and his projectiles if you don't use ranged attacks such as bows or spells. The second is across a spiked bridge with his skeletons protecting the mechanism that you need to activate in order to cross it. If you don't want to rely on ranged attacks, you need to kill the skeletons in quick succession to buy yourself enough time to turn the bridge over before they get back up. It strikes me as a smart decision to make both of these Necromancers immediately visible as you enter the area, since it avoids confusion when their skeletons get back up after death. If you didn't see them at first, you might second guess your understanding from the first Necromancer that skeletons revive while their Necromancer is still alive. Since you can see both of these Necromancers, you can make the association between them and their respective groups of skeletons, reinforcing the earlier lesson about Necromancers and resurrecting skeletons. Because both of these Necromancers are harder to reach than the first, I also feel like From Software was intentionally wasting no time in building upon the resurrection mechanic, not just trusting, but knowing how well they taught it to you before. They trust you to understand what you need to do, kill the Necromancers, now making the challenge to figure out how to do it. With both initially out of reach, I had to rethink how to take them out with my mostly melee character, even leveraging a new strategy by using a bow, which I otherwise rarely use, to take out the Necromancer on the bridge in my first playthrough. I love that the obstacles in the way of these enemies, the packs of skeletons, the spiked bridge, the deadly drops, encouraged me to really think about the environment and consider new ways to succeed. I also feel that they play to the game's strengths as an RPG, catering to multiple playstyles and challenging you to find what works best for you in each encounter. Many of the remaining Necromancers in the Catacombs are hidden away in the many side paths and dead ends strewn throughout the environment, which, like many areas in Dark Souls, is twisty and maze-like. Despite this architectural similarity, however, the Necromancers completely changed the way that I approached the area. First, because the resurrecting skeletons encourage you to run through each area quickly to hunt down their Necromaster, it's easy to get lost in the twists and turns of the Catacombs. You don't have much time to pay close attention to where you've been as you sprint through, so it's much more likely that you'll have trouble mapping out the Catacombs than another area you can move through more slowly. Even though it's not laid out dramatically differently from other areas in the game, the Catacombs' defining mechanic, Resurrection, creates a landscape that presents new and unique challenges to navigation. It also changed my ultimate goal for the level. In most areas in Dark Souls, I found that my goal was to slowly and carefully work my way from the start of the area to the boss, with the boss's defeat being the exclamation point, so to speak. I always felt more comfortable in an area after killing the boss because it made me feel like I'd truly mastered the area. However, I found that my primary goal in the Catacombs was, first and foremost, to kill each new Necromancer as I found him. Because they don't respawn, defeating one gave me the same rush as killing a boss, albeit on a smaller scale. In this way, the Catacombs became something of a game of hide-and-go murder that, to me, was totally different from any other area I'd gone through in Dark Souls for how it spread the satisfaction of defeating a boss across the entire environment. With that said, I'd say it's a pretty good thing that the actual area boss, Pinwheel, is really a bit of a pushover, having less health than even some very early bosses such as the Bell Gargoyles or Chaos Witch Quelaag. What was even weirder to me, at least at first, was that the fight against Pinwheel doesn't even seem to use the necromancy mechanic that defines the Catacombs. Pinwheel only has two moves at its disposal. First, it can create clones of itself, and second, it can cast fireball spells at you. The clones disappear when hit, but will also cast fireballs along with the originals, so the strategy I ended up using was just rushing the real Pinwheel and tearing it apart. While it doesn't share much in the way of mechanics with the Necromancers, only really having fireball attacks in common, I realized after the fact that Pinwheel actually makes you use the same strategy you used against our lantern-wielding adversaries. As you work your way through the Catacombs, you're not just learning how the necromancy mechanic works, you're also steadily developing an appreciation for target prioritization, focusing your attention on the enemy that's most important. If you don't apply this concept in the fight against Pinwheel and focus on the clones, you're liable to get torn apart by its fireballs, which are easy enough to dodge but deal massive damage if they hit. If you demonstrate that you have a clear understanding of how to prioritize your target, however, the boss fight becomes a cakewalk, even rewarding you with an extremely useful item, the Rite of Kindling, when you win. Pinwheel seems to me to have been designed with the understanding that the necromancers that infest the Catacombs are the area's real boss, with Pinwheel at the end simply there to confirm that you understand the concept that the area was designed to emphasize. Pinwheel is proof that some tests don't need to be terribly difficult to determine that you understand the core concept. There's a lot I love about the Catacombs, so it's a bit difficult to sum up, but I'll try. It's an area defined by a unique mechanic that it teaches to you clearly and entirely through observation and experience, not leveraging any sort of tutorial. This mechanic, the necromancers and their packs of skeletons, then completely changes the way you have to approach both combat and exploration, creating an experience that engages you through how different it is from everything else you've encountered. The area and its unique mechanic encourage you to leverage a skill you might not have otherwise needed to use much, the ability to prioritize one target among many. Finally, it ends by testing you on your understanding of this concept with a boss that makes sure you get it while still designed with the understanding that it's not the real challenge in the Catacombs. When I said I'd be doing another video on Dark Souls, I got a lot of predictions for levels like Sen's Fortress, Enter Londo, or the Painted World of Ariamis, and I'll probably come back to Dark Souls again later to talk about one or more of those. But make no bones about it, the Catacombs, with their spooky skeletons and game-changing necromancers, are, to me, divine. Thanks for watching, and I hope you'll join me next time when we take a look at another great level in gaming.